Hey folks, welcome back for another build video. This time around we are trying against all odds to make SaCrUm ImPeRiUm worth it. And I think that's a great way to start if I'm being honest. While I'm happy with this build, I think it's unique and fun to play around with. I fundamentally do not like the SaCrUm ImPeRiUm. I don't know why this is on a G28 variant. If this were on a harder hitting Marksman Rifle or even on a classic M1A, I would love this weapon so much more. So I just wanted to lay that out there, not to bash this build before we even get into it, but I just want to recognize that obviously the SaCrUm ImPeRiUm is a very awkward weapon. It's not everyone's favorite marksman rifle, but if you've been looking for a build to try and make use of it, may I present the following. And this build really does hinge on three pieces. You obviously have the SaCrUm ImPeRiUm, but almost more importantly, you have the cherished chest piece and the courier backpack. For the specialization, we've gone with the sharpshooter. Another choice I played around with and a very defensible pivot option here would be the survivalist. Given how many status effects we're throwing around, you actually kill a surprising number of enemies under status effects, which adds 3 to the ammo bar through the explosive bolt acquisition talent. So if you want to get even crazier with this build, you could go that route. However, I settled on the sharpshooter because I really was scrabbling for as much weapon damage as I could to try and get those headshots with SaCrUm ImPeRiUm a little bit easier. So the 1 in the head talent, increasing headshot damage with marksman rifles, really put it over the edge for me. And on top of that, the breath control talent with the 15% increased weapon stability, reduced recoil, and faster acquisition of targets also felt really good with what would traditionally be called a marksman rifle build. But I did want to go ahead and mention both of those options here, because I think either one can work depending on your playstyle and depending on how heavily you're leaning into the status effect or headshot components of this build. With that out of the way, let's get into the primary weapon. We have, of course, the SaCrUm ImPeRiUm, the exotic marksman rifle that everyone loves to hate. But I will say, now that they have finally put a scope on this marksman rifle, I can't believe I have to say that, but now that they have, I do enjoy this gun far more than when it originally came out. It feels like it does have a use. And as you'll see later in the video, this is a great gun for sneaking up, marking as many targets as possible before wreaking havoc with status effects. And while it does struggle in solo play on higher difficulties, it is certainly usable, and it really does shine in group play where the attention is not all on you. You can sit back a little farther and just continually apply status effects. And one of those status effects is, of course, burn, which can be applied with the trap talent. Now, when an enemy is in your crosshair, either scoped or not scoped, for 1 second, that target is marked, and you can tag up to 10 enemies at one time. And if you kill any of the marked targets with a headshot, all other targets that you've previously marked will have a 50% movement speed decrease and receive burn for 10 seconds. And the cooldown on that is 30 seconds. But killing another enemy with a headshot will shorten the cooldown for 10 seconds. So while there are a number of hoops to jump through, if you can stack enough weapon damage and headshot damage on a build, it will allow you to get a headshot kill which procs the trap talent and pairs really nicely with the rest of the skills and talents that we have stacked on this build. For a secondary weapon, I've gone with another fast-firing marksman rifle, which is, of course, the SCAR variant of the Darkness, which, as you can see down there, comes with the perfect eyeless talent, which deals 25% weapon damage to blinded enemies, and after 3 kills applies blind to the next enemy you hit. And while we won't be using the second paragraph there all that often, we're going to be applying blind plenty enough on our own. The plus 25% weapon damage to blinded enemies is quite a great talent to have. And given how heavily we invested in marksman rifle damage here, I wanted to make use of that as much as possible with both the primary and secondary weapon. But I will bring up, if you want a secondary weapon with a little bit of variation from your primary, the Carnage would also be a good option to go with. Given that it, of course, sports the perfect sadist talent, giving you plus 25% damage to bleeding enemies, also something we're going to be doing quite a lot. But for my money, I went with the darkness, really leaning into the Marksman Rifle damage here. Just really treating this as a medium to long range build. For our sidearm, we've gone with the backup boomstick just to give ourselves some short range cover. If you have a particular pistol that you would rather use, you could certainly go that route. The TDR card custom comes to mind, as it would give you a +1 skill tier while you were using your sidearm. But I felt that the backup boomstick, given that we went with 2 marksman rifles as our primary and secondary weapons, is a good juxtaposition to all of that long range fire. For our mask, we've gone with the exotic mask Vial, which obviously sports the toxic delivery talent. Status effects also apply a damage over time debuff for 10 seconds now, and the total damage is equivalent to 50% of your concussion grenade damage, and is increased by status effect attributes. So the last part of the sentence there is very key. It's why we stacked a whole load of status effect attributes on this build to help increase the toxic delivery effectiveness. And in the mod slot there, we've gone with headshot damage to help increase the firepower of SaCrUm ImPeRiUm. For our backpack, we've gone with the aforementioned the Courier, and we also get that one-piece Habsburg Guard bonus of 15% headshot damage. As you can see there, we've rolled status effects, leaving us with a core attribute of armor regen in that other secondary attribute slot, and then we've gone with headshot damage in the mod slot. So in an ideal world, I do think the perfect combination of attributes here would be weapon damage, headshot damage, and then status effects. But as a reasonable compromise, if you can get a Courier backpack with a usable armor core and then roll status effects, it will absolutely make this a usable piece. And then of course down there we do have perfect creeping death, which is very crucial to go with here. When you apply a status effect, it now also applies to all enemies within 10 meters of your target, and crucially now has a reduced 10-second cooldown. That's 5 seconds less than the normal variant of creeping death. And part of the reason why I'm specifically calling that out is, as you'll see later in the video, with as much status effect attributes as we've stacked on this build, your status effects will actually be applied for longer than 10 seconds. So between perfect trauma on the chest piece and perfect creeping death on the backpack, you can almost infinitely apply blind to a group of enemies, keeping them out of action while you then pummel them with the rest of your status effects from this build, whether it be burn, bleed, or the toxic delivery debuff. And for our chest, we have cherished the named Habsburg Guard chest piece. Right off the top, it gives us that plus 15% Marksman Rifle damage bonus. And then as you can see down there, we have rolled the core attribute to a weapon damage core. And we were able to do that because the attributes are headshot damage and critical hit damage. Obviously, the critical hit damage is going to waste there. Ideally, you would have headshot damage and status effects again in those secondary attribute slots. But with all of the rest of the status effect damage that we were able to pile onto this build, it was more important to me to get a little bit more headshot damage on this build to, again, allow you to actually get a headshot kill with SaCrUm ImPeRiUm. Because while I've put together a status effect build before with SaCrUm ImPeRiUm, the problem was you then did not have enough weapon damage to actually get a headshot kill and proc Actum Est. Now with that ramble out of the way, I am sure some of you have been far more fortunate with your cherished drops. So ideally you would have a weapon damage core, headshot damage, and status effects here in the attribute slots, and then go with headshot damage in the mod slot. But I am here to tell you that even a roll such as this, which looks far less than perfect, is still usable, because again, one of the important things down there is the perfect trauma talent, which applies blind to an enemy you hit in the head and bleed to an enemy you hit in the chest, and both of those have independent 20-second cooldown timers. So to put this all together, and again, you'll see it later in the video when it works as planned, you'll sneak in with SaCrUm ImPeRiUm, mark as many targets as possible, and then you will engage an enemy with a headshot, which will apply blind to that enemy and every enemy within a 10-meter radius, thanks to perfect creeping death. From there, you'll have a group of enemies that will be blind for at least 10 seconds, giving you a bunch of time to then get a headshot kill with SaCrUm ImPeRiUm, which will proc the Actum Est talent, reducing movement speed and applying burn to any enemy you were able to tag regardless of distance between them. So now you've got all of your enemies blinded and burning, From there, you can switch to the darkness, get an additional 25% damage against those blinded enemies. I normally then switch to going for a headshot to then apply bleed to all enemies within range. Now they're bleeding, blind, and burning. And from there, you can continue to lay into them. And of course, through all of this, they are also suffering from the toxic delivery debuff, making it a really bad time for them. And with all of this chaos, generally, if the encounter isn't already over, your cooldown for the blind has then finished. So you can then go for another headshot to apply blind to another group of enemies within range and just start the whole status effect process all over again. So for our gloves, we've gone with Firm Handshake, which, while the brand bonus there is obviously wasted, I went with these gloves because it's a very easy and accessible way to get a weapon damage core and obviously that 15% status effects attribute onto your status effect build here. So again, the SMG damage is obviously not being utilized here, but what is being utilized is that native weapon damage core and that native 15% status effects damage. For our holster, we have our one piece of Electrique, which has the plus 10% status effects bonus there. On top of that, we get a skill tier, and then we have gone with status effects and hazard protection in the attribute slots. And I've gone with Electrique for a couple of different reasons. One, it's the new brand set, and it's just obviously fun to play around with new stuff. But more importantly, given that Electrique and, as you'll see in the knee pads, Golan gear have status effects as that first brand bonus, it's an easy way to stack some additional status effects on this build. And if you get a good roll with your attributes, namely status effects and either hazard protection or headshot damage in that secondary attribute slot already, you can then roll the core attribute to weapon damage. Because while that skill tier is nice to have here, ideally you would swap it for a weapon damage core all day, every day. But what is more important here is because the plus 10% status effects there is the first brand bonus, if you wanted to switch this to a weapon core, you only have to get lucky with one piece here. You only have to get one piece that has status effects natively rolled in that second attribute slot, which would then allow you the freedom to re-roll that core attribute to weapon damage. And for our knee pads, we have one piece of Golan gear here to get that plus 10% status effects bonus. Again, for a similar reason as Electrique, as we just talked about. If you wanted to go and roll this core attribute to weapon damage, you only need to get lucky with one piece. And for our skills here, we've gone with the Stinger Hive and the Firestarter Chem Launcher. The Stinger Hive is a great addition to any Marksman Rifle or LMG long distance build. As you'll see later on, you just plop it down next to you. It provides some cover for you against any enemies that try to charge your position. And then the Firestarter Chem Launcher is a great way to apply the burn status effect to a group of targets, particularly ones that have had their movement speed reduced by the Actum Est talent. So that is this build. When you put it all together, it's just a phenomenal way to apply a number of different status effects and finally get some use out of the SaCrUm ImPeRiUm that has been clogging your inventory. So let me know what you think of this one in the comments. Obviously, a ton of different ways you could go with this build, even on top of what I've already shown you here. And there are certainly improvements you could make to the individual gear pieces that I've shown off. But hopefully this gives you an idea of how to put together a build that can actually utilize SaCrUm ImPeRiUm. And hopefully you, like me, will keep your fingers crossed for another retooling of this weapon to make it even better than it already is. As always, like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this, and tell your friends about it if you want to help this channel grow. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next one.